Morning, Anthony.
Morning, John. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and you?
Pretty good.
Good.
So we're just waiting for the counselors and the rest of our guests.
You must be a pro at this now, right?
Well, as soon as I say that, something bad will happen. So I'll say I'm still learning.
Well, we're all still learning. That's a good thing.
McGovern. Councilor McGovern. Absent. Councilor Nolan.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Zondervan.
Present and audible.
There are 4 members present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. With that, all votes will be by roll call. Welcome to my colleagues and DPW. I believe we will have a presentation, so I'll hand it over to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and City Councillors. Before we get started, perhaps I should introduce those other members of City staff that are on the meeting this morning. And so I think you know most of the people, at least who are visible here this morning. So you've got Michael Orr. Michael obviously is the director of our recycling division. You have John Fitzgerald. John is the head of the solid waste division within the Department of Public Works. John Ardone is the deputy commissioner at Public Works. And I also know that Rebecca Fuentes, who is the assistant commissioner for operations and planning, may also join us. And also I know that Arthur Goldberg, Arthur from the Law Department, is also here this morning. So, you know, obviously the aspects of the Zero Waste Master Plan have been before City Council in the recent past, most particularly when it came, we have appropriated monies towards advancing the Zero Waste Plan, and also we have submitted some council order responses as well in the recent past. And obviously those responses and those appropriations gave rise to the call of this meeting. What we'd like to do this morning is go through a relatively brief presentation that will be primarily given by John Fitzgerald and Michael Orr. But there are I think there are a few points that I'd like to make at the outset. I mean, obviously, COVID has been disruptive to our plan this year, most particularly when it comes to the organics, household organics pickup program. Obviously, we have just recently restarted that program, and you know, I think people again are beginning to participate in it at the same rate as they were before it was stopped last year. I think by and large, though, I think both the city and residents are in a good position to accelerate elements of this program. We've already spoken about the fact that we expect to expand the compost program to 13 plus properties this year. We spoke, I think, earlier during City Council meetings about starting up the textile program later this year. And then obviously we've spoken about, you know, extending the small business recycling program to more properties, as well as starting off a compost program for small businesses in the city this year. I think in terms of just, you know, one thing I would point to in terms of residents being receptive to this is that I think our Recycle Right program has been a huge success over the last couple of years in terms of the extent to which we have contaminated materials in our recycling program. And again, Michael will speak in more detail to that moving forward. I would also like to say that we have been working with our law department over the last period of time to begin to draft changes to those various ordinances that impact solid waste and recycling in the city. And our expectation is that in the next month or two, that we'll be able to come back to be it the Health and Environment Committee or indeed the Ordinance Committee with more details in terms of proposals in that regard. But we also want to hear, I think we would like to think that this morning's discussion may provide us with some direction with regard to some of those changes that we certainly would like to make as well. I think the other thing that's important to us as well, as we think through some of the elements of the program, is that we take our show on the road, so to speak. We'd like to begin to visit neighborhoods this fall, so as to begin to talk about, standardized trash barrels, about the compost program, and about people participating in that to an extent that they haven't previous to this. If you think about what the city has on offer for residents, we have a fantastic recycling program. We have a well-established trash program. We have a compost program that we believe is the best in the state, if not in the region. And so I think it's really important to us that we begin to encourage people to an extent that they haven't participated up to now in both recycling and the compost programs. And so that's something that we want to do during the next year. Again, presuming that public health issues are continue to be positive. And then finally, I just wanted to make mention of the Recycling Advisory Committee. They are a huge asset to both the Department of Public Works and I think to the city as a whole. We have people who are hugely dedicated to working with us in terms of improving our programs and bringing new ideas to the Department of Public Works. In the last hour or so, we got a letter from our Recycling Advisory Committee, and I have forwarded that to the City Clerk, who I think may have sent that or maybe in the process of sending that to members of City Council as well. So you should have that in your package, if not now, certainly today sometime. With that, I'm going to pass you on to John Fitzgerald, and John will lead the first part of the presentation, and then Michael will finish it off after that. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, councilors. My name is John Fitzgerald. I oversee the Solid Waste Division here at Public Works, and I will get things started off with where we are with our Zero Waste Master Plan recommendations. Several topics, first of which is organics collection. We are currently expanding our baseline curbside collection of 1 to 12 unit buildings to include 13 plus unit buildings in 2 phases. The first phase is to include 277 13 plus buildings that currently have city trash collection. That is an ongoing process. We've been at that for close to a year now in small increments. And phase 2 is to include 208 13 plus unit buildings that do not have city trash service, that do have city recycling service. And we propose to do that over the next 2 calendar years, 2022 and 2023. With regard to trash collection, Owen mentioned that our plan is to provide trash containers to residents citywide. We propose to do that in spring of next year. As you might imagine, right-sizing that container is of paramount importance. We currently have a study going on. I will get into more details on that in slide number 7. With regard to reduce and recycle, in addition to our curbside and commercial programs, we will continue to support other reduction and reuse activities in the community through fix-it clinics, online forums, our extensive community outreach program, and the like. Our mattress recycling program has been highly successful. I think that's an understatement. I have more detailed information on that coming up in slide number 8. Mike, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Regarding recycling improvement, We will, of course, continue on with our Recycle It Right campaign, improving the capture of target materials. The quality of our curbside recycling is second to none. More information, more detailed information on that is coming up at slide number 9. With regard to our recycling center, an ongoing topic of conversation here at Public Works for some time is the best way to reconfigure the recycling drop-off center located at the DPW yard. We are all aware that its current location is not the best. Our goal is to make some improvements out there, relocate that facility such that it is safer and more customer friendly. With regard to textile recycling, we are actively investigating what is the best system for Cambridge. We propose to have a system in place by the fall of this year. We've interviewed some potential service providers and we're evaluating what it all means right now. With regard to commercial recycling, we have expanded our small business recycling program, started as a pilot a couple of years ago with 125 businesses. Currently, we are serving 175 businesses, and that material is collected by our curbside recycling contractor. We propose to start a small business compost pilot in the fall of this year with 100 businesses to start, and we propose that collection of that material will be done by in-house crews. We further wish to explore expanding that business compost recycling pilot in calendar years 22, and 23. Next slide, please, Mike. So what we have here is a breakdown of the last 13 years or so, showing a steadily declining Cambridge residential trash generation rate up until 2019. In the COVID era, you can see that our curbside trash generation numbers are up about 16%, which, if you think about it, makes sense given how people's lifestyles have changed during the COVID era. Most notably that to maintain social distancing and for other reasons, we took compost as trash between March 2019 and May of 2020. So now that we are back into the curbside compost collection business and COVID restrictions are easing somewhat, assuming that continues to be the case, we expect to see those trash figures decline going forward. We currently service 32,000 households with our in-house collection crews every week. Next slide, please, Mike. And Owen made mention earlier to our Recycling Advisory Committee, a tremendous asset, highly valued resource for us. The committee consists of 23 members. They meet monthly, and despite being remote in the COVID era, they continue to do excellent work engaging the community. The written news articles contributed steadily, consistently to our monthly recycling newsletter, created an inventory of small business repair facilities and the like. A great asset of high value to us. Next slide, Mike, please. Standard trash barrels. So we are very excited in Public Works about this program for a number of reasons, chief among them being the health and safety of our employees. Our current system relies on employees dragging barrels from the curb out to the truck and manually lifting and dumping those barrels, which is a physically arduous task. And over time, there's no question that that takes a toll on our employees' bodies. A city-provided trash barrel service, the barrels would be very similar to the blue recycling toters that we are all familiar with, in that they are tipped mechanically. They have wheels, so you wheel them from the curb out to the truck, at which point they are tipped mechanically, greatly reducing the manual heavy lifting. In addition to the labor benefits, they are durable, very robust construction, rodent resistant, permanently attached lids. Again, with the wheels, so residents can wheel them out to the curb rather than drag them. So we are looking, again, we are greatly anticipating this program, which we anticipate to kick off in the spring of next year. The first step in the process, though, as you might expect, is ensuring that the barrels we purchase are correctly sized. We have begun this process internally with collection day observations of trash setouts. That is going to continue on for some period of time. We just started that program over the past week or two, so we don't have a lot of data to share with you at this point. But over the next several months, we look forward to sharing that data with you. As part of the standardized trash barrel program, we would also wish to revise the refuse and litter ordinance accordingly. This is not something that we propose to do immediately, but over time, things that we should consider are setting out plastic bags at the curb. It's very difficult to maintain an effective rodent control program when people can just drop plastic bags on the sidewalk. And the 150-pound per household limit that the refuse and litter ordinance 8.24 currently allows is something that I would suggest would be a good topic to reconsider as well. Next slide, Mike, please. All right, we mentioned mattress recycling earlier. We have a highly successful program, began in April of 2019. Since that time, over 10,000 mattresses, equating to about 320 tons, have been diverted from disposal. These mattresses are deconstructed and their individual components are recycled. Our contractor is UTEC out of Lawrence, Massachusetts. Each week, they send down 1 or 2 trucks, depending on demand, for a curbside collection of mattresses and box springs. It's been a grant-funded program by the Mass DEP, so we wish to thank them for their involvement in this program. And UTEC, if you're not aware, is a social enterprise that employs at-risk youth, a great organization, great program, highly successful, and we look forward to maintaining that program into the future. Slide, please, Mike. And an update on our Recycle It Right program. As always, plastic and glass containers, paper, cardboard, and metals are still recyclable at the curb. The only change in that program is the elimination of aseptic cartons like juice box containers and of paper cartons. There is a heavy plastic component in those paper cartons, which is troublesome to the recycling industry. So those have been removed from the program. But of particular note, I would like to call out our contamination levels of our recycling through the really standout work of Mike Orr and his recycling staff. Our contamination levels in our curbside recycling is 4% right now. Far and away, we are Casella's best municipal customer. And that is the result of a highly effective outreach program, highly effective recycling staff, and recycling advisory committee. Lower contamination rates equal lower cost. It's really that simple. Under our old contract, we saved significantly because our curbside recycling met contamination thresholds, and on our current contract, those contamination levels were taken into consideration, really give us the best rate of any municipalities around. So again, with regard to Recycle It Right, it's we want to be sure to thank the Cambridge community for helping us reach this goal. Again, our staff and Recycling Advisory Committee for the reach out, you can see write-ups of the success of this program in Cambridge's What Works City application, Mass Municipal Association newsletter, recycling, resource recycling, and others. Thank you. That concludes my portion. Mike?
All right, thanks, John. So I'll pick it up with the Small Business Recycle Program. And so we launched this in November 2018 with 120 businesses. We've actually gone up quite a bit. With November 2020, we're at about 186 businesses now. We've found out that about 58% of them are minority or woman-owned. And so we're really excited for that, just to make sure we've got a good inclusive program. But we also have capacity for more small businesses to join. So, feel free to send some businesses our way if they want to apply for the program, and we can see if we can get them in. And just to reiterate on John's point about, recycling, there's a lot of news that says that, recycling is not working or whatnot, but, what we say is recyclable is actually being recycled. And we're actively keeping in touch with Casella on that to make sure that things are going well. And then in addition to the small business recycling, we've also got the small business compost program. So I wanted to thank Cambridge Table to Farm for bringing this up and bringing it to the city council. And this is a very exciting opportunity for us to allow small businesses to compost with the city. So we're going to be launching in fall of 2021, up to 100 businesses to start. And, our goals with this are, John mentioned this before, but, managing rodents is a big piece of what we're trying to do. So we want to be able to help better manage the rodent population by having good compost containers with latching lids and they close well, and so that the rodents can't get access to the food. We also want to help small businesses reduce costs with, the post-pandemic, issues that a lot of businesses have been facing. This is a great opportunity for that. We want to make it accessible for minority and women-owned businesses, and we obviously want to maximize diversion. So in 2022 and 2023, we're going to be looking to potentially expand this, but first we want to get our feet wet and just understand what it would look like to do this program. And then that leads us into residential curbside organic. So we're very excited. We're in our third week of bringing this back from a suspension during COVID, and we were very excited to see all the bins at the curb. We're checking the tonnage reports that we get every day just to see how we're doing and how we can improve. But we do want to reiterate how important this program is to meeting our goals for waste reduction, for keeping food scraps out of the landfill, protecting the climate, and keeping rodents away. Again, the rodent piece is a big part of this, and we still see quite a bit of rodent activity at the curb, so it'd be great if we could get some more moved into the compost bins and keep the rodents out. And touching a little bit more on the expansion. So in fall 2019, we started the process of phasing in some of the large residential buildings that are on the city's collection route. So these are your 13 plus unit buildings that weren't in the initial rollout. We want to bring them in starting in the fall 2019, but obviously when COVID hit, we kind of hit a pause on that. And so we're kind of resuming that right now, talking to large buildings and seeing how we can bring them on board. And then we want to continue expanding the program by looking at buildings that are not on the city's collection route right now. And we're looking at 2022, 2023 for that as well. And that's another 208 large buildings, mostly 15, 20 units and up. So jumping into some of the new programs, I know that there's a few discussions around textiles, so we wanted to kind of give a little bit more information. So when we talk about textiles, we want to be clear that this is not just clothing, but it's also bedding and curtains and other fabrics. So textiles is a much broader category than just clothing. And then 95% of textiles can be reused or recycled. And so often we think about reuse with, donating your old clothes to Goodwill that you no longer wear. that are still reusable, but you just don't want them anymore. But there's also a huge market for recycling those fabrics and, you know, putting them to better use than just sitting in the landfill. And they're actually very valuable. They're in very high demand, and the commodity value of those are really high. So, so when we're thinking about this program, there's a couple of considerations. So sanitation, so simply just trying to keep it clean. You know, we don't want clothes strewn all about the community, so we want to have like a nice clean program. Responsible material management, so we want to, you know, work with a vendor that's going to be responsible about not only just keeping things clean, but also, you know, working with end markets to make sure that they're getting to people that need it and that they're going to responsible locations. And then we want to maximize diversion. So one of the keys to this is that we don't want to have this program focused just on reusable clothing. We want it to be reusable clothing and recyclable textiles. So that could be clothing that has a tear in it, kind of like the photo on the slide. So even those items can be recycled. They be shredded up and turned into a new product. Often they're used as insulation in vehicles or insulation in homes. So, but a big piece of this is Mass DEP has recognized the value of all the textiles that are in the trash right now, and they proposed a ban on all textiles going to trash for the fall of 2021. So we're still, you know, waiting to hear from Mass DEP if that ban is going into effect. But regardless of whether they're going to continue with the fall 2021 plan, we want to have something in place, and this is a good high priority for us to reduce our waste. So we've looked at a few vendors, and you know, we're trying to understand, you know, who will do all textiles and who's looking for just the clothing reuse. And we've looked at two very closely that have a good track record in Massachusetts. So Helpsy is a B corporation, which means that they have to consider the impact of their decisions on workers and customers and the environment. And so we've talked to them about what they could do, and that's providing bins throughout the city for 24/7 access. This is not too dissimilar from what we see already. A couple schools have bins, and a couple of gas stations might have clothing donation bins or textile donation bins. And so we want to use those as, that would be, Helpsy would be doing a lot more of the bins throughout the city, but they could also offer a curbside collection component for large quantities. So if someone's doing a big clean out of their house and all of their kids' stuff, and they just want to do one big collection, they can get a curbside pickup of those textiles on a day that's not their trash collection day. So Helpsy has done programs, and they're launching in the city of Boston, city of Newton as well. And so that's one option. And Simple Recycling is another one that is very popular. They've launched in Somerville, Natick, and a couple other cities in Massachusetts. And they do a curbside collection program where you, as the resident, would put out a pink bag every week, and they would come by on your collection day and pick up that pink bag of textiles and take them to recycling. So we're looking at those two options. And so, you know, we'll be looking to kind of finalize that by the end of the summer and working to have something in place by the end of the fall. And one of the components of this, though, is to create a textiles webpage to help advertise not just Helpsy, but also consider, you know, working with some of the nonprofits in the community that collect textiles for reuse in the Boston area. Places like The Spot, for instance, over in East Cambridge, that does a lot of work to try to help get, you know, clothes to people that might be in need of clothing. So, you know, we want to be cognizant of that as well with this program. Okay, and the last topic, but I guess probably the most dense topic we've got, is the single-use plastics project. So just as a background, in May of 2019, the City Council asked the Recycling Advisory Committee and DPW to draft recommendations. So we've done quite a bit of research and outreach. And one of the things that we learned was about 25% of our public area trash or recycling are single-use products. So just a helpful piece of data that the Recycling Advisory Committee brought to our attention and did some research on. But further outreach and research we did. So, in fall 2019, we did a survey to the small businesses in Cambridge. And it was actually not just small businesses, but all businesses in Cambridge that do food service. We got about 100 responses, which is pretty high. And we met, in addition to just getting these survey responses and taking them in and evaluating them and understanding them, we met with several business representatives and associations like the East Cambridge Business Association and Cambridge Local First. In addition to that, we in the RAC Recycling Advisory Committee spoke with Brookline about their plastics bylaw. And we've spoken with the city of Berkeley and the city of San Francisco about their ordinances on plastics. And we went to a Northeast Recycling Council conference about single-use products, which is a great organization that spans basically most of the East Coast and mostly from like Maryland on north to talk about what are the solutions to single use in the region. So that was very valuable for us as well. So some of the results that we saw with this research and outreach was that businesses and consumers, they both want to reduce waste. There was no debate about that, but neither of them were super excited to solely bear the responsibility of having to do that. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky when we talk about a single-use plastics ordinance, is that it's a hard push-pull in some respects. Some other things that we researched were just, if we did have a ban in effect for single-use plastics, how would that have an impact? So some of the alternatives to single-use plastics have a higher environmental impact than plastics. And that's, when you take into a life cycle analysis, you look at what it takes to manufacture, a paper takeout container versus a plastic. In some respects, the paper has a higher environmental impact than the plastic. Some of the alternatives to single plastics do still contain plastic. So paper cups, for instance, have a plastic liner in them. And so that's, you'll notice that when you have like a cold item in your hand and it doesn't sweat, and that's because there's a plastic liner kind of acting as that moisture barrier. We, talking to some of the businesses, they've said that it's more expensive for a lot of these alternatives to plastics. And so that's a big thing that we want to be mindful of. And a lot of the alternatives to plastics are not recyclable or compostable, whereas some of the plastic items that we do use, that businesses use currently, we are able to recycle. So that's something to consider. And then a number of restaurants and food service businesses made mention that some of the alternatives to plastics just aren't suitable for takeout, for some of the takeout orders. So some issues associated with like moisture and moisture wicking and different things like that were mentioned about why alternatives to the plastics weren't always feasible. So, and another big piece of our research and outreach was that if we did ban all plastics, that may actually increase our waste. So plastic cups is a good example. Those are recyclable, but if we ban them, then we'd have more paper cups, but those are not recyclable. So that's just something to be mindful of. So in looking at everything, we looked at all the different ordinances that kind of fall under the solid waste realm. And so these are some of the ordinances we thought might need to be revised or reconsidered if we were to consider a single-use plastics ordinance. So the refuse and litter ordinance, so this is municipal code 8.24, 8.56, 8.68. So refuse and litter, the promotion of non-residential solid waste. So that's basically just the commercial realm. The bag ordinance from 2015 and the polystyrene ordinance from 2016. So with all that being said, we thought instead of this being a single-use plastics ordinance, we thought a single-use packaging ordinance might be a better, more holistic way at looking at all aspects of disposable packaging. And so we were proposing an ordinance that'd be phased in over 2 years. And phase one would look a little bit like this. So plastic produce bags would be phased out and recyclable or compostable bags would be allowed. Retailers may no longer sell polystyrene products So that would be, and I'll show some examples shortly, like a styrofoam cooler, styrofoam cups, and even rigid polystyrene cups as well, which are a common red cup that we all know very well. And then accessory disposable food serviceware we shall be provided only upon request or at self-service stations. So that would be a big component of trying to encourage the consumers to reduce and reuse. So instead of a delivery where you're ordering some takeout or something and you get a knife, fork, spoon kit and napkins and all that, you would have to request those as opposed to the consumer automatically be opted in to those items. And then the last part of phase 1 would be food vendors providing 3 receptacles for disposal, trash, recycle, and compost. So this is kind of just a visual of what each of those steps would look like. So for produce bags, your typical plastic produce bag that we've probably all seen in the grocery store would be phased out. And instead, there would be either a paper package, food or beverage in a polystyrene container. This is going a little bit further where it says a retail establishment cannot sell these items. And so this is something that we'd have to discuss a little bit more with the law department, but these are some of the items that would be prohibited from sale. The accessory disposable foodware. So basically this piece of the proposal is saying that if you're going to a restaurant or a coffee shop or you're doing takeout of any sort, you would have to opt in to these items as opposed to opting out like you do right now. So if you go to get a coffee, you would get a coffee in a cup and you would have to choose whether you want the cup sleeve, you'd have to choose whether you want the cup lid, or you'd have to choose whether you want the cup, whatever we call this thing, the stopper to make it not leak out. So, the consumer would have to make the choice to opt into those things as opposed to the consumer having to opt out of those items. And so this has great potential for really drawing down reduction. This really encourages people to think twice. And associated with this would be for businesses that would want to go this far, providing signage to encourage reduction. And then the last part of that step was going from just standard trash barrels at the front of the house, as we call it. So if you're a consumer, you're done eating somewhere, there's only a trash bin. This proposal would say you'd have to have a trash and recycle bin or a trash, recycle, and compost bin if you have food waste. And then the last part of our proposal is looking at a phase 2, which would require that food vendors offer only reusable food serviceware to serve customers eating on their premises. This would be applicable to businesses of a certain size and square footage. So, we were mindful that there are some food service businesses in Cambridge that are very small and that, having a dishwasher installed is physically not feasible perhaps. So we thought that was important to kind of have in there. And, a big piece of this is that we do need to communicate with ISD, Inspectional Services Department, to make sure this is not something that is going to be an issue in terms of health and safety. Some of the exceptions of businesses only offering reusable items is that you could have like compostable paper liners. If you had like a plastic tray that you had and you just had a paper liner on it that was compostable, that would be acceptable. Paper wrappers would be acceptable. Paper napkins, as long as they're all compostable, it'd be allowed. Straws would be exempted from this, but again, those straws would be something you have to opt in for, as phase 1 had talked about. And then recyclable aluminum foil for wrapping burritos or wraps would be allowed as well, as that's part of kind of the food service aspect. So this is an example of, in Los Angeles, a Mexican restaurant saw an annual savings of $400 by switching from all disposables to all reusables. This is part of a campaign by an organization called Rethink Disposables. And I think this was partially in line with a new ordinance change in Los Angeles. So this is a great example of how this could be done, and it's not a huge burden on small businesses. But lastly, we just, we want to talk about, I think the issue of plastics is very vast, and there's not really an easy way to markedly reduce our plastic usage without talking about extended producer responsibility. So just as a background, material bans, really, we can only impact food and beverages packed or packaged in Cambridge. So only businesses and consumers are affected. So a single-use plastics ban would just affect businesses and consumers here. Whereas in an EPR world, so extended producer responsibility, that is a better way of kind of approaching this from a more systemic change mechanism. So in EPR, you bring all actors together. So not just the consumers and the businesses, but also the producers of the materials. So your plastics manufacturers, but also you bring in government and you bring in recyclers, recyclers being our recycling organization, Casella, perhaps. And you bring them all together to talk about what is the most efficient environmentally and financially to provide materials management in a given area. So EPR legislation is being talked about more and more, especially in the last 2 years. It's a statewide tool, so it's not a local tool as much, but it can be implemented at the state level. And I believe there are a few bills in the State House currently. And I believe some of the state reps and senators from Cambridge are co-sponsors. But you know, we really wanted to talk about how this is a great opportunity to really bring the circular economy to Massachusetts, instead of material bans that kind of just, you know, put a little stop with a certain item here or there. It doesn't really impact the flow of what we're doing right now, which is kind of a linear model, and EPR can kind of bring this into a more circular model, which is really what the end goal should be for material management. So, and one of the big things is that, you know, a material ban will impact more so small businesses in Cambridge, whereas in EPR, you can bring in some of the large actors like Amazon into the fold and have them be more accountable for their waste, as opposed to just saying to the small businesses and the consumers in Cambridge that you have to change from plastic to paper. So it brings in a more holistic feel. And we thought that was just very important to mention as we conclude our presentation. So I guess we'll stop our presentation for now and go back to Owen or the City Council.
Great, thank you so much, Mike and all the presenters. We'll do some clarifying questions from my colleagues on the committee. Please do limit this to clarifying questions only. We'll have time for more extensive discussion later after public comment. So if any of my colleagues have questions, I see Councilor Nolan.
Thank you. Love this. I will stick to clarifying questions. I have a zillion other comments. Can you hear me okay? I'm never sure if all right, yes. If I'm not clear, please let me know. One clarifying question on the textile program, which is quite important for us to start, given what we know about the number of pounds that are likely in, plus the environmental and frankly tragic whole industry has now gotten to the point where it's incredibly wasteful. When we passed the council order, we talked about reaching out to the nonprofits, which I know you did, but also I'm wondering if you've reached out to places like Goodwill and Big Brother, Big Sister and the Epilepsy Foundation. There's a number of organizations that are currently collecting textiles, in essence, curbside. I know because I've used them myself. And we want to make sure that since the highest use is reuse, that those organizations, I know there's a few stores that sell the clothes. I'm glad that you are in conversation with the Spot, which is where, you know, I have donated clothes and helped help them with their reorganization. It's a really wonderful community resource. I know of two other, I think, closed closets that happen. There's one in the basement of a church in Cambridgeport. So my clarifying question is, I'm wondering how much you've reached out to the range of nonprofits that might be affected by this. If we start collecting curbside, will those businesses suffer? And is there a way that we can ensure that they continue to receive the goods, since they're all nonprofits that use the proceeds from the whatever they have for the benefit, similar to a B Corp?
Would you like me to go? Okay. Yes, so we have spoken to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and a few other organizations. And one of the conclusions we came up with was that there are still so many textiles in the trash right now that there's actually a lot to go around. And so we're not 100% sure how this is going to impact each of them, but we do want to make sure that in our textiles website that we have, we'll advertise, what Helpsy can do, but also give some information about what nonprofits are in the community and are are looking for some of these textiles. So we want to kind of figure out how to best do both things at the same time.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor, we've also reached out to Nancy Tober, and we expect to continue to talk to her about how best to help with the spot as well. So we absolutely don't want to disadvantage that effort either. And so our expectation is that we'll continue to work with these organizations through the summer so as to make sure that we maximize the amount of recycling done without disadvantaging those who are providing a valuable service otherwise.
Right, thank you. I mean, honestly, this is another area we should all be reducing, and people should not be buying clothes as much as they do to just recycle, because they're often made of low quality, which turns them into the kind of textiles that you talk about, which is they're only good actually for shredding up into textiles, which we don't want to do. But I recognize there's those two separate markets. I hope you factor into, as opposed to sending yet another truck, we already have 4 trucks going around to every single house until another few years, as we know, and as you all know, I'm dying for that to happen once New York City EV garbage trucks come on, that they're spewing diesel particulates and some kind of emissions. But adding a 5th truck seems like maybe it would be better to have just citywide collection points. So I'm glad you're working on that, and encourage you to continue that work to ensure that we get the message out about recycling. The other clarifying question is around the garbage pickup and the trash numbers, with the goal of 4 pounds per person. Is that per person or per household by 2050?
Per household.
Okay, so if that's the goal, I would think, have you calculated out what 4 pounds would fit? And it seems to me we would want to start training people and use the smallest possible trash container, because we want people to start thinking they cannot just fill it up. I know it's challenging, but many towns in the state actually are doing a pay as you throw. But even if we don't do that, if we change the ordinance such that you must be using our city accepted, city provided trash barrels, I would imagine that 4 pounds fits pretty easily into the smallest one you mentioned. I think it was the 32 pound. So I would hope that we would go with the smaller containers, partly to start training our residents that you really don't need to generate that much trash. If you're taking your compost, you're taking your recycling, you're taking your textiles, you actually shouldn't have that much trash. So has that been part of the calculation, to think ahead to ensure that we are not giving the message that it's okay to just fill this bin up?
For you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, if you think in terms of 2050 and the 4 pound goal, that's 30 years from now. Our expectation is that we may go through perhaps another 2 iterations of providing people with trash barrels before we get to that point. I think, given the, and John Fitzgerald can speak in more detail to this in a second, but there are multiple goals associated with what we're trying to achieve at this point in time. And one of them being the reduction, the reduction of materials that are in plastic bags, or that won't fit into our barrels. And so we want to make sure that in the short term, as we look at this over the next 10 years, that the barrel we provide in densely populated areas will be adequately sized so that we again continue to reduce the rodent population in the city. But also, I think it's also important to recognize that if you think about the Recycle Right campaign, and if you think about our recycling campaign overall, and the degree to which people have participated so fully in that, our expectation is that people will, with more encouragement, continue to put materials into the right bin moving forward. We have a role to play here too, and continue to educate people as to what to do here. And that's why we need to take, as I said, our show on the road in that regard. But I'm concerned about us going to too small a container immediately, because we don't want to see on a systematic basis a lot of people putting out plastic bags adjacent to their bins. I think what we want to do initially is continue to educate people, and then over time, begin to reduce the size of the trash bin. And as we continue to encourage people to reduce and to recycle. But maybe John, do you want to speak a little bit more in detail about this issue?
Yes, Owen. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, like Owen said, that going forward, these barrels that we're talking about now have a life expectancy of 10 to 15 years. So at certain intervals, they'll be switched out. And the most important aspect to this, I think, is that the educational outreach, which I would suggest Mike and his staff are very good at, it really never ends. So as time goes by, we implement this new system for several reasons. I talked about health and safety of our employees and rodent control being the biggest ones. The educational outreach never ends. And as we progress towards 2050 and the barrels we're talking about today are phased out of service and replaced with new ones, I think that it is entirely likely that they continue to get smaller and smaller over time.
Thank you. I agree, but even with 18 pounds, it seems like it could fit in a small barrel, and that's where we are now, and we're hopefully going to go back to the 15, the trend that we were on. So I'm just encouraging all of us, and I am thrilled that recycling reduction from 11% to 4% contamination, I agree it works. Sending the message is pretty important in this area, and I am really thrilled, just for the point of clarification, if we change that ordinance, people won't be able to put out plastic bags. They'll be slapped on the orange things that we see on our recycling bins, that it won't actually be allowed. So I think those were my clarifying questions. And I'll go on.
Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Sabino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thanks to you and to staff for setting up this presentation. I thought it has been really helpful. I had a couple clarifying questions. The one is maybe to a similar vein and thinking about the size of trash barrels and thinking about how we're planning, but from a different direction. And that's having myself lived in a couple different buildings in Cambridge that are primarily renters. There's 2 times a year where trash bins overflow, and we get questions from residents, and you just notice it yourself if you're living in those buildings. It's usually June 1st, which just happened, and I noticed it myself at my own building, and September 1st when folks are moving in and moving out. And I'm sure some of that is unavoidable as long as we live in a university town with high turnover and live in a place where people are just getting priced out of Cambridge all the time and having to move. But just curious to hear more about how the city and DPW plans for that. If it's additional service on those days, having additional staff ready on those times of year, and then just how I'm always impressed about how much stuff gets thrown out on those dates that is perfectly good and people just can't move it. And I think folks are familiar with the Boston Christmas phenomenon of people getting free stuff on the street, but what we're doing as a city to kind of facilitate that, I guess, so that it doesn't just end up in the curb or in the trash if it doesn't have to.
Michael, do you want to take the first stab at this?
Yeah, I mean, that is an excellent question, and we are grappling with that all the time. And what makes it very difficult is that I don't know if you saw the headline that came out recently from Goodwill, had a press release come out about how everyone just during COVID just took all their junk to Goodwill and they just had to trash it all. And so it's hard for a lot of people to understand where to dispose of their stuff when they're moving out or cleaning out. And we're constantly trying to figure out what is the best mechanism for residents to collaborate on this. And so there's a lot of online sharing communities like nextdoor.com, Craigslist, and then my favorite is Buy Nothing on the Facebook groups, which, if anyone's been on them, in 24 hours, something's posted and it's gone and someone's got a new home for that item. And so it takes a lot of engagement to kind of really take a stab at like how to clear up the sidewalks during move-out season.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, I'm familiar with some of those groups, and they're great, and it's great to see sort of residents organize themselves. I'm always interested if there's more we can do from the city side. Happy to support, whether that's a point person or a website, or just having an event and taking over a city parking lot or something at those times of year, and having a place where people can bring stuff. But no, that's great to know that the staff are thinking about it. Other question I had was a bit more general one, and it's just a question that residents bring to me all the time, who've lived in other places and wonder, I recycled X item where I used to live, but it's not recyclable in Cambridge, and I imagine some of that, if not all of it, is dictated by our recycling partners of what can and can't be recycled. But one item that comes to the top of my head is milk cartons, which I think aren't recyclable in Cambridge, although I may be wrong about that, but just trying to understand, is that all dictated to us from our recycling contract partners, or is there some flexibility the city has?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the milk cartons thing is actually relatively new. And what we find is that it takes a little bit of time for people to understand these changes. So a good example of this would be pizza boxes. For years, pizza boxes were a no for recycling. Now they're a yes, and they have been for several years. But it has taken many years for people to get the word out about that. So even today we hear people saying, I didn't know pizza boxes are okay now. And they have been for a few years. So I think it just takes a while for when these changes do come in that people are educated on that. But I would say that for the most part, Massachusetts there's not really anywhere in Massachusetts that allows milk cartons except for maybe a small part of Western Mass. And again, this is another example of where extended producer responsibility would be very powerful, is that it creates a uniform system throughout the state where every actor is part of the process, and there's complete information that is very accessible and very complete to everyone in the state. And so that's another good example of where that plays in very, very helpfully.
Great, thank you. And thanks again for this update in this meeting today. And it's been great to see some of the waste initiatives in the past couple of years, the mattress recycling, and I'm very excited about the new standardized trash bins, which I think will help with the rat issue. So I'll yield back.
Thanks, Councillor. We have Councillor Carlone next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to congratulate everybody on the presentation. It was extremely informative, covered a lot of area, but was constantly interesting. And as my fellow councilors indicated, it's pretty exciting what you're doing. So I have a question. Mike, you mentioned buying nothing on Facebook. We downsized 8 years ago, and we had unbelievable difficulty in giving furniture away. Each nonprofit would only accept certain kinds of furniture. We had to put on the street for the city to pick up a beautiful sofa. And it was like a complete waste. So basically this service on Buy Nothing, you post it and then it's open to the public to pick it up if they wish.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. It is just peer-to-peer. It's kind of taking out the middle person of the nonprofit. And so often nonprofits want very specific items and very good condition items because it's, you don't want the person receiving the donated item to feel like they're getting a very poor quality item. But what we find in some of these kind of tools, or some of these online forums, is that there's a huge demand and a huge supply of these items in a community like Cambridge. Cambridge has a lot of people that are longtime residents, and you have a lot of people that are 22 years old, fresh out of college, moving here for their first job, and they're looking to furnish an apartment. And to them, a free couch is quite valuable. So we've been finding that the world of reduce and reuse is actually very powerful despite what the city is doing. You know, we share this kind of information with residents, but it's great that the residents are taking this on upon themselves. And there are about 8,000 community members in these groups. And it's incredible how much stuff is just exchanged informally without a nonprofit, without the city interfering. And it just shows, I think, just how powerful it is, the community involvement in the grassroots part of all this.
Well, again, what I also love is everybody's enthusiasm for what they're working on. And I include John, Mike, and Owen, who look particularly sharp on this very warm day. And then I look over at somebody in a gray blue shirt, and I'm wondering, did he not get the memo? Of course, look at our city council. We look like we're on vacation. But it was truly an excellent presentation, and I thought the questions before me were right on target, and I have no doubt the chair has some good questions coming up. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor, and I certainly echo my colleagues' comments. Thank you to the staff for an excellent presentation. And I look forward to more discussion in a moment. I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions, and then we'll do public comment before we go to discussion. So I read the RAC letter, and they're recommending 35-gallon trash receptacles. Is that what you're proposing as well?
Mr. Chairman, at the moment we're looking at 32 to 48. And again, if you look at some of the information that we gathered maybe a couple of years ago, certain parts of the city are on a consistent basis, generating less than 20 pounds on a weekly basis, and certainly they could handle a 32-gallon bin. There are other parts of the city that produce a lot more, and so we need to just go back out and revisit those areas again. Our expectation over the next number of years is that, we will provide an appropriate sized bin. And I think we will continue to revisit neighborhoods where we continue to see people putting out plastic bags. I think initially what we'd like to do is maybe refrain from banning those immediately, but over time begin to investigate and talk to people in more detail as to what the issues are for them in terms of not being able to stay within the size that's been provided to them, be it a 32 or a 48. Because I think we're looking at this on a system-wide basis, and we expect to have some excursions from that standard. But at the moment, this is a long way of saying that we're looking between 32 and 48 in terms of typical sizes here. Because we're also looking at larger buildings with more households. We haven't up to now, and the ordinance doesn't allow for a 65-gallon toter for trash. But again, given the size of a given property, we may allow that, given the fact that we will have tippers and we'll have standardized trash containers as well. But again, it would very much depend on particular situation. But I think by and large, we're looking between 32 and 48.
Thank you. And would it be possible at all to allow people to choose? I know, for example, in my household, I don't actually generate enough trash to fill up the barrel, but then sometimes I forget to put it out, and then I actually have enough space to just wait a week. And with people properly separating their trash, which we do in my household, there actually isn't any food waste in that trash barrel. So it isn't actually a problem. So, it might make sense to allow people to choose what size they want for now.
No, we don't disagree with that. Just the logistics of that are a little bit challenging, but certainly, yeah, that's something that we will be looking at over the next couple of months.
Great. Thank you so much again, and we'll have some more discussion in a minute, but first we'll go to public comment, Mr. Clerk.
first speaker on public comment is Meera Singh.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm a Cambridge resident and I'm thrilled to hear that DPW is developing a plan for textile recycling. And my comment is just to urge the subcommittee to support DPW's intention to include textile recycling in its program. People recycle plastics, glass, metal, and paper, but sadly, clothes, shoes, and accessories are ignored. And even this is included in textile recycling: damaged clothes, damaged shoes, and accessories. And I hope that you will support them. Textile recycling is a tangible way for the city to get closer to its zero waste goals. Thank you.
There is no one else who's currently in the Zoom that is signed up for public comment.
Great, thank you, Mr. Clerk. I'll entertain a motion to close public comment by Councilor Carlone.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern. Absent. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. The motion passes 4 in favor, 1 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thanks to Meera for her public comment. Always great to hear from Meera. So, any further questions or discussion comments that my colleagues want to bring up at this point? Councilor Nolan.
Thanks. I have about 17. How many should I go through?
1, please.
Okay, I'll ask somebody. I was thrilled to see the idea of the composting bins. More than 10 years ago, I sent the city council, I don't know if Councilor Carlone was on it, a picture from having gone in San Francisco, a major tourist destination, outdoors, had compost already in place, trash, recycling, compost. This is not new. This is something that can be handled even in very large metropolitan areas. A couple of questions related to that. One, can we require it? And as part of a large building special permit, can we require them to include in their planning for the building ability for them to internally do composting itself? It's something probably many of them don't think of. They think of trash, they think maybe of recycling. Can we encourage all of that, those buildings? And I recognize that might be more of a building zoning question, but I think the question is how far along are we in expanding this? I recognize it becomes more of a challenge. When I put out my composting bin, it's very different than having a 200-unit apartment building combining all their compost into something that could very quickly become a challenge in terms of smells and many other elements that people find challenging. But obviously we can handle it. I'm just curious as to for those larger, more consequential areas, what we're thinking.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think, Councillor, in terms of the first part of your question, as to whether we can require restaurateurs and cafes to provide compost as well as recycling and trash. I think it's something that we want to discuss with the law department. There is the refuse and litter ordinance as things stand, and there is the recycling ordinance as things stand, and both of those have significant provisions in terms of commercial properties and what they should and shouldn't do. But I do think that we need to go back and revisit that with our law department, and it's something that we would like to make as a requirement moving forward. And we would do this, I mean, from the perspective that if you think about the state's requirements at this point in time in terms of composting, as things stand, if you generate a ton of compost in a week, you're required to, if you produce more than a ton of organic material in a week, you are required to compost. That's going to be reduced to half a ton. And also given the fact that the city is now going to begin to offer a compost service to restaurateurs across the city, there is no reason for us not to require that of people moving forward. And so it's something that we want to look at in terms of the refuse and litter and the recycling ordinance moving forward. And so I expect that we'll be putting something before you with reference to that. With regard to the zoning ordinance, I think we've already spoken during Envision Cambridge about requiring that the facilities be in place so as to be able to provide, chutes or what have you for trash, recycling, and compost. And so I think that's as far as we can go in terms of that, but certainly that's a recommendation that we made during Envision Cambridge.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor Carlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, a chute is nothing. If there are other chutes already in the plan, which there are, adding one chute, 1 foot by 1 foot, is not going to be a big demand nor a big cost. It's what happens at the bottom, of course, that might cost more. But and in a special permit, I think I know community development doesn't always agree, but from my background, we can do things to a greater detail than we're doing now. And this is an excellent question and very doable, very doable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Nolan,
Yeah,
you
thanks.
just have more questions?
Yeah, I'll ask just one more now. On the idea of eventual trash reduction, and I agree, I'm glad to hear we're thinking about I didn't realize there might be some times when our workers are having to pick up more than 100 pounds or 150. It seems like 100 might even be a reasonable limit because the health and safety of our workers is obviously paramount. And again, it sends the message to our residents, there's no reason anyone should be generating that much trash, especially because even with packaging, it can be recycled. What do we know about best practice in reducing that? And if we move to this idea of that one, whatever, if it's 28 or 32 or 35, I didn't see the letter that Chair Zondervan referenced from the Recycling Advisory Committee, maybe I missed it, but whichever it is, will we also then change our ordinance to say not only can you not put plastic bags, but you can only put what can fit in that one container? Because I live in a 2-family house. I think it would be totally appropriate to say you get this one size container, just like recycling. Well, recycling may be different, but at least for trash, that you are not allowed to put anything out other than in the city provided trash container. Is that what we're moving towards in addition to a weight limit, which would in essence be a volume limit?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So, Councillor, in the existing refuse and litter ordinance, that's chapter 8.24, when it speaks about authorized rubbish receptacles, it speaks to the fact that, it goes to some details in terms of the need that it should be fly-tight, rodent resistance, non-flammable, and so on. But it also speaks to the fact that on the day of pickup, heavy plastic bags of not less than 3 mil that are fly-tight, rodent-resistant, non-flammable, and waterproof may be set out on the curbside. I think, given where we're going here, that I don't think we should be doing it immediately, because I do think we want to get some experience in the community as to what's working and what's not working. But I do think if we want to begin to address both, rodent issues, and also just recognizing the fact that you have a 65-gallon recycling toter, a 22-gallon compost toter, and a 32 or a 48-gallon trash toter, that there is more than enough space for those items that one is throwing out on a weekly basis. But I think we do need to go through the experience of maybe a year with the city supplied toters in place so that we understand more completely as to what it is that's causing people to continue to use plastic bags. And I would propose that we come back to City Council within a short period of time to actually propose changes to this ordinance. I do think that they're necessary. And there are some other aspects of the refuse and litter ordinance that do need to be changed as well. And so we recognize that need and something that we want to do working with the law department over the next period of time.
Thank you. I wasn't suggesting we do it tomorrow, but I am supporting the idea that we do it soon and that we, again, move people to, I think people can rise to the challenge, and we, through education, I think can get to a point of being closer to less refuse. And even though the goal is by 2050, if we could reach 8 pounds by 5 years, that would be even better. So thank you. I'll yield for now, Chair Zondervan.
Thank you, Councilor. Just a quick follow-up to the Commissioner. I know we've talked about pay-as-you-throw many times, and I think I understand the challenges with trying to implement that here. But what about the idea of charging for any extra bags that are left out, so that, you know, if the resident is able to fit the trash in the provided barrel, then they're not charging anything extra. But if they leave additional bags of trash out, they would pay a nominal fee for those. And, you know, in the past, that may have been more difficult operationally, but I think now it should be relatively easy to charge for something like that.
Mr. Chairman, I think, you know, pay-as-you-throw programs work well in suburban communities. They're more challenging in an urban environment where you have toters, you know, cheek by jowl, adjacent to each other, and, you know, who are you finding on a given, you know, we have problems as things stand with enforcement in terms of, you know, materials that shouldn't be put out and so on, and who do we identify as being the culprits and so on. And so we'll continue to have this conversation, I expect, but it's a challenging one moving forward. And perhaps, you know, some form of pay-as-you-throw in terms of excess rubbish at some point in time may be the way to go. But I think we do need a period of time with, you know, city-supplied toters before we can make that determination.
Thanks, that makes sense to me. Councilor Carlos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know DPW knows at least the 4 members in this meeting on the council want to move as quickly as you feel comfortable, maybe more so, but we get that you have to live with the reality of people complaining. So just please keep that in mind. I appreciate that the discussion focused on future actions that might happen that would improve the situation. Are there others that weren't mentioned in the presentation that you're considering 10 years out? There's some discussion about composting not necessarily being reused as fertilizer, or where are we heading? I know there are limitations and there are restrictions financially, but what are you hoping for? I might not be on the council in 10 years. In fact, I won't be. But tell us about where John, Mike, and Owen want to be.
It's a really good question, Councillor. There are a number of things in-house and externally that we have ambitions to do over the next period of time. You know, we contract quite a bit of that, which of our services at this point in time, and we have really good contractors who work with us. We have some ambition to bring more of those services in-house. You know, providing good quality jobs to people working at the Department of Public Works. One of the constraints that exists at the moment is that, you know, we don't have enough space, but we're looking to improve that. And so, you know, Councillor Nolan mentioned the fact that, you know, we're using electric trucks in New York. And in fact, we've had a number of conversations over the last month with the people from New York about the electric truck that they're using, and they see it as being a high quality piece of equipment. And so We certainly are interested in investing in more electric infrastructure, and I use that term broadly, as we move forward as well. I mean, the fertilizer compost discussion is a complicated discussion. At this point in time, we're obviously using the GLSD facility in North Andover, and that is promoted, and the research that suggests that it's the best. The one thing I would say with that research is that it perhaps didn't provide enough credit to the compost area in terms of soil recovery and soil regeneration. But from our perspective at this point in time, given that we're the only municipality in the game of compost on a systematic level, our ability to work with adjoining communities and perhaps look at an alternative is constrained. And so over time, as Boston and Somerville and our surrounding communities begin to look at compost as part of their program, then I think there perhaps may be more opportunities for us to revisit that area. And it's something that we certainly would be interested in doing. But that does not seem to be on the immediate horizon. I don't know if John or Michael or John have any additional comments in this area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in addition to everything that Owen said, I would just add that what I'm excited to see happen over the longer term is continuing advancements and continuing improved reliability with regard to hybrid and electric commercial trucks. We've made mention a couple of times about what's happening in New York City with their battery electric vehicle. We had a great Zoom meeting with those folks a few weeks ago. Our disposal contractor, Republic Industries, has a similar vehicle, same manufacturer, at one of their collection operations in North Carolina. Just yesterday, I was talking with one of their players down there, and we're going to set up another meeting to discuss the reliability of that vehicle going forward. If you're into that sort of thing, it's exciting.
And I might just add, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the one piece that I think we didn't fully capture in the presentation was what is in the trash right now and how much can we pull out through the existing infrastructure. And that number is quite high. It's about 70% of our trash could be diverted today. So that's food waste, that's recyclables, and then that's your what we call other divertibles, meaning scrap metal, textiles, and there's like one other category. But we already have the infrastructure in place for a lot of these things. I think the trouble that we're having is that we're not getting enough participation in some respects. So part of it is working with the landlords in the community to really get the word out about some of these things. But we're confident that there's a significant amount of trash reduction we could do today. We just need more uptake in some of these programs.
Perhaps a mailer. I know you've sent out mailers, but I mean, I'm shocked to hear it's as high as 70%. I'm sure my colleagues are too. By the way, I'm also shocked that we're the only city that composts. Perhaps my colleagues knew that, but I didn't know that. Thank you again. You normally don't associate a DPW and the word progressive around the country, but you guys are at the top of the list. Well, 3 out of 4 are at the top of the list. No.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I could just jump in for 1 second, because nobody ever lets me talk in this forum. Councilor Calhoun, I can't stress enough what Owen was saying about providing good jobs for our folks. I mean, 10 years from now, if you look at the program that we're trying to set up, hopefully our trash is reduced to a point where we have even people who are in place now who can begin to take over our recycling program and start to bring that stuff in-house. And, if you remember when Compost first started, that started as a pilot with a private company. and we quickly took that over as well. So as we progress, and I agree, I do feel like we're a progressive DPW. I think that we can provide those jobs and we can take on some of the things that maybe our contractors are doing now. So,
just excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and I concur. It is an exciting time to be in the trash business, even as we try to reduce the waste. And you know, that's really my concern, and you know, the piece that keeps nagging at me. I mean, you guys are obviously doing a great job in DPW with the current infrastructure and capabilities to reduce our waste and divert as much as we can away from landfills. And you know, we can do more in terms of outreach and getting people to participate. But at the end of the day, part of the problem here is that it is also too complicated. I mean, you know, I'm into this stuff and I can't keep track of it, you know. So one day we can do milk cartons, the next day we can't, you know, and the part that I don't understand is why do we even allow these materials to come in to our household and to be sold in our stores if we don't know how to recycle them or how to dispose of them in sustainable ways. And you know, I'm really excited about the EPR stuff, but we've been talking about it for 10 years, and I recognize, you know, that maybe there's some more progress and some more appetite, you know, hopefully at the state level, and I think we will get there. But the reason that you know, I advocate for a ban on single-use plastics and supported the plastic bag ban and so on is that that's what we can do now. You know, the other stuff we just have to wait for other people to do their part, and that's just taking too long. So I do want to bring the conversation to those two topics: the proposal that you put forward on wrapping materials. I forget the exact term you used, but I think that's a sensible approach, and so I guess I would like to talk through that a little bit more in more detail, and then on EPR as well, and particularly, you know, help us understand how we can best support these efforts, because, you know, as you're hearing, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm here. We're ready to go. So how can we best support? You know, I put the single-use plastics ban on the agenda, and you've come back with this slightly alternative proposal, which I think is good. But how do we operationalize that? How do we make it happen? Because we really want to get going here.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I think what we'd like to do is to come back to you maybe perhaps in a month's time with some proposed changes to ordinances. You know, the simplest changes are associated with, let's say, bring your own bag ordinance. As things stand, you know, we exempt produce bags in terms of them not being plastic, and I think that exemption doesn't need to continue to exist. I think you've got existing supermarkets who are using compost bags, and so we do need to change that ordinance to reflect that change. So there are some simple ordinance changes that I think we can put before you in perhaps a month or so, be it the Ordinance Committee or be it the Health and Environment Committee. And perhaps the Health and Environment might be the best place to go in terms of a precursor to an Ordinance Committee hearing. And so we're working with the law department at this point in terms of executing some of those changes. And so we'd like to perhaps return to you with regard to that. I don't know, Michael or John, if you have some other ideas in terms of how to accelerate some of these additional changes. And again, we can come back to you with the refuse and litter ordinance in terms of, you know, putting in the compost bins as well as recycling and trash bins at the front of restaurants and cafes and so on. Michael and John, I don't know if there are additional immediate things that you think might be worthwhile thinking about.
No, I appreciate, Mr. Chair, that you're interested in the EPR and the discussions of that. And it is something that's growing in a lot of states. You know, our neighbor to the north, Maine, has just passed something through their state house to the next step to perhaps advance an EPR bill for the state of Maine. And, you know, Massachusetts is probably a little bit more progressive than Maine, and you know, we're not quite there at the state house. And I think there's a number of organizations doing quite a lot to try to bring that to the forefront and bring that institutional change that we all need to kind of push this a little bit further past just a ban to something that's a little bit more institutionalized.
I mean, beyond that, Councillor, I think the appropriations that have been executed in the recent past are a huge help to us in terms of advancing our program as well. And given the fact that, you know, compost is back, I think we really want to engage with the community over the next period of time so as to make sure that people take advantage of the various programs, to include a textile program that we'd like to bring on again later this fall. And so I think there's an onus on us to get out and engage with the community to a significant extent over the next year or so as to make sure that these programs are effective and are taken advantage of in the community.
Great, thank you. I'm told that there's someone in public comment who was able to join and had signed up to speak. So I'll entertain a motion to suspend the rules so we can hear from them. Councilor Carlone, thank you. Mr. Clerk?
On extending the rules to reopen public comment, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern, absent. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4 in favor, 1 absent. On public comment.
Can I speak? Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had signed up to comment and then I couldn't figure out how it was working before. So my name is Debbie Galiff, and I am speaking on behalf of the RAC, on behalf of the Recycling Advisory Committee. And I just wanted to reiterate what's in the letter which you have received, which we sent to Commissioner Reardon, and I believe he sent copies to you. And we support the city provided trash bins. We also agree with the lower size. In other words, 35 gallons is what we were thinking, but I guess it may not come in 35 size. So 32 to 48 with accommodations for larger buildings, for multifamily buildings, which could be larger bins. We also would like a life cycle analysis of the plastic use, because that could be important. In terms of single-use plastics, we encourage a phased-in reduction in the availability of the single-use serviceware. And again, it's all types. The so-called compostable ware does not compost in our system, so that's really not very helpful. We would like the city to plan for a future of reusables instead of single-use. And we also want to make sure that businesses are provided with clear communications and materials and outreach regarding any new policies. And I think that's it. I agree with everything else that's been said, and the RAC is very, very supportive of all of this. Thank you very much.
That's it for public commenters.
Great, thanks so much, Mr. Clerk. Do we have to vote to close public comment again?
Yes.
Okay, on that motion.
On closing public comment, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern, absent. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4 in favor, 1 absent.
Okay, Councilor Nolan.
Thank you, Chair Zondervan, and thank you to the RAC for putting forward those ideas. I have not seen the letter yet, so I will read it, but given what you said, I've already said most of that and agree with it entirely. I do think for our city to get a couple things to think about, as was mentioned before, I think by Councilor Carlone, and all of us understand it, there is a reuse completely citizen driven in terms of BNC, the Buy Nothing Cambridge. That group now has 3 different groups because they're limited to 5,000 people each. I'm in the first one, and then it's The second one was started, and I just heard a third one is. So I don't know if the city can do more to let residents know about that kind of work. I know Craigslist and others work, but there have been some issues with reliability and frankly scams on Craigslist, whereas BNC is a community-driven process that would be really good for people to know, because reuse is the highest and best use as opposed to even recycling. And I do agree, our city is amazing. I think we're still the only large city on the East Coast, or maybe in the greater Boston area, that has curbside composting. I still want us to catch up to cities on the West Coast, which have had it for longer and which have diverted. I think San Francisco's 80% of their waste is diverted. Portland, Oregon, which I have family members at, and my sister used to be the O&O Reardon of Portland, Oregon many years ago, and they started a lot of this LED lights, I think 20 years ago under her leadership, but they are also in this process, and I'm really glad to hear that we're using best practice and reaching out to those kinds of cities to understand how we can do more. And the reason I bring up that point, I think it is citizen education. It's not like their trash is that different. It's not that their people are that different, but there's something about people there happen to know, they're in the habit, they do it. And I think the more that we can use the benefit of lessons learned from taking the recycling contamination down from, I think what I heard was faster than we expected to a lower number than expected. It means that with the right education, whatever the communication plan was, Councilor Carlone suggested a mailer to cities. I think that works maybe for some people, but then there's lots of other ways people get information that we should just, it should be all hands and social media and any other kind of media on deck for that. I wanted to follow, I look forward to the plastics reduction ordinance, as Councilor Zondervan said, is when it comes back to this committee or another committee, that is definitely something that would be great to see start phased in approach. On the EPR, which also I endorse, having run actually a composting company many years ago and been involved 20 years ago through Businesses for Social Responsibility on this idea of a completely closed loop economy. I'm curious as to, we can't really do it on our own, as Chair Zondervan said. I don't think we're going to say, no, you can't even sell any product in those unrecyclable containers in all of Cambridge. But if we got the entire state or the entire region to do more, I think that's where the EPR will really make sense. I assume, if I'm hearing from you, that's not something we could do on our own, but we can put in, is there anything we can put in place that maybe moves our city more towards that? Or is it that we should advocate at the state level for that to be in place to enable us to do more?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, I think we think that advocacy is the best way for us to assist in moving that forward at this point in time. There is not much that we can do as a smaller community at this time in terms of changing that. And it is a state level or indeed federal level requirement in this particular instance.
Thanks. I think that, that comment, and I don't know if we already do communicate out to folks about the reuse, but the more we can do, the better and to have our own internal to the city. And maybe that's also something, Chair Zondervan, we could talk about if there's a regional way to ensure that the reuse happens. I know the Spot, for instance, has an enormous, unbelievable outpouring of goods from people in Cambridge who want to donate, and it is used by families in Cambridge who don't have the resources to supply their own families. And it is, I have been there, and it is really a wonderful attribute that you have high quality, very wide range of sizes and goods, from snow boots to shoes to sneakers to clothes of all sight. And I wonder almost if that should also be a greater Boston area, because it may be that our community can give so much that there's others, just like we did during the pandemic. This community gave a tremendous amount to Chelsea when we had felt that our own needs might not be as great as others. So I'm glad that we're working to get the word about the reuse. Thank you. I yield for now.
Thank you, Councillor. I've sent a motion to the clerk, which we can discuss. And then I'll also work with my colleagues and with the commissioner to draft the resolution that we can pass in the council in support of EPR at the state level.
Councilor Zondervan, would you like to move forward on the motion now?
Yes, thank you.
So I'll read it for the record. The motion reads that the city manager be and hereby is requested to work with DPW and the law department to bring forward proposed changes to the refuse and litter recycling and bring your own bag, polystyrene, and any other relevant ordinances for discussion in the Health and Environment Committee no later than July 31st.
Any discussion? Mr. Commissioner, does that seem reasonable to you?
Councillor, that works for us. I know Arthur is on from the law department. I just want to make sure that I know that they have a tremendous amount of work on their plate. But I believe that should work for them as well. But it'd be best if Arthur could confirm.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that should work fine.
Great, thanks so much. Any discussion or questions from my colleague? Councilor Nolan?
Yes, it sounds, sorry, I'm leaning close to see it. Any other relevant ordinances? This is just basically anything DPW and the law department thinks we should discuss, or is it specifically related to the plastics packaging issue?
No, just related to our zero waste goals.
Okay, do we need to add that?
Yeah, we can add that in.
And now I can see it without having you all see my, okay. Yeah, then it may make sense to add related to ordinances related to our zero waste goals for discussion.
Okay, I'm sending it to the clerk right now. Okay, so you should have that. Okay, does that look good?
From a DPW perspective, Councillor, that's fine.
Great, so Mr. Clerk, on that motion, please.
On that motion, Councilor Carlone.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern. Absent. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Motion passes, 4 in favor, 1 absent.
Great, thanks. So unless we have any other comments from my colleagues, I'll just close by saying thank you again. This was really excellent. I'm really excited about the progress that we're making, and I look forward to continuing to make even more progress. Councilor Nolan?
Yeah, just one quick follow-up question. I noticed in the, sorry, I, like you, I've thought about this a lot. We have the various buckets. We have the trash, we have the recycling. The other bucket, like metals, et cetera, is there a plan or something to acknowledge about that? And that might be furniture, that might, basically things that don't fit into those buckets. It's not compost, it's not recycling, it's not trash, it's not yard waste. it's not a mattress. You know, maybe it's a futon, which isn't recyclable through the mattress program. Is there any sense that we have a plan for that, or that we should be thinking about, or is that the kind of thing we want to be reused within the community? If that makes sense as a question towards zero waste.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to, through you, Mr. Chair. You know, one of the great resources that we have on our website is the Get Rid of It Right tool. We have about 500 searches every day in that tool of how do I get rid of a metal hanger? How do I get rid of a futon? How do I get rid of medication? I mean, any item that you want to get rid of, we virtually have all of them covered in that. And that steers people in the different directions. So it might say, go to the recycle center, go to this depot, or choose to reduce and reuse by contacting these nonprofits. So we've been building that tool more and more, and we're trying to get it out there more and more to the community, but we've steadily increased from a few searches a day to 500, 600, and probably over nearly 1,000 during move-out season.
Yes, as you know, I think I've communicated with you to update that,
Yes.
Recycle It Right several times, because most of the state uses the Recyclopedia, and it's quite useful. So that's good to know, and we're directing people to as much as we can to reuse. Thank you. That was it, Chair Zondo.
Great, thanks. And I do have the app on my phone as well. I use it often, so it's a great resource.
Maybe we're responsible for 10 of those searches.
Possibly. All right. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
On that motion,
Councilor Corley.
Councilor Carlin.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor McGovern. Absent. Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4 in favor, 1 absent.
Great. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
you.
Meeting.
Happy Wednesday.
Thank you.